It's so great to be with all of you here today. This is my first time speaking in this new virtual environment. I think we're all wishing we were in person. I wish I could see all of your faces, but it's so great to see everyone coming in to the chat. Love to see excitement already for this talk. So I'm really excited to share with you all today. Let me go ahead and get my screen shared and we're going to jump right into it. Awesome. Today I'm how we at Autodesk have been reimagining the app, but more importantly, when is it time for you to maybe rethink your advocate programs and provide some meaningful frameworks and models and approaches that can help you do so. So let's jump right into it. Just a little bit more about myself. I'm tuning in from San Diego, California today. I've been a little bit of a digital nomad since COVID started and moved from San Francisco down to San Diego. I was born and raised in Ohio, go Bucks for the fellow Buckeyes out there, and I hold my Midwest roots really close. I attribute that to my focus on people and my focus on relationships, and I think that's why I so naturally fell into the community space, supporting user communities at Autodesk to start my community career. I'm a Luma certified practitioner, applying design thinking principles to solve business challenges and to really partner with bringing advocates and customers into the community building process. And like Valentina said, I've spearheaded co-building that 200 plus global user group program. And now I'm currently focused on reimagining advocate programs at Autodesk. And that's what I'm here to talk with you all about today. So let's jump into the agenda. First, yes, I said talking because I really hope this becomes more of a conversation and less of a presentation. So as you have questions, feel free to post them in the chat, and I hope we'll have time at the end to get to those and have a conversation about them. So today's agenda. I'm passionate about community building and especially building advocate programs. So I'm going to set the scene for advocacy programs that we've had at Autodesk just to give a good foundation and then move us into how you can recognize when you can optimize opportunities to reimagine those programs. And I'll briefly touch on the measures of success, leading us into tactics that I've used to design these meaningful, thoughtfully integrated advocate programs that bring customers into the design process. And I think that's where the fun really begins. So let's take a walk down memory lane in the Autodesk community and specifically looking at the historic, current, and future state of how we have communicated and articulated advocacy programs specifically. So this is not a holistic look at community at Autodesk, but really narrowing in into those advocate programs. So historically, who we were designing these programs for were our super users, those that were in the forums day in and day out, ready to help any customer. And that moves us into the why. We were looking at that help and looking at success measures focused around help, whether that be a break-fix solution, a workaround, a technical support. And this contribution was always captured on our company-owned properties. And this can be viewed as the Autodesk forum. So our forum site, autodesk.forums.com, you could think about that equivalent to your company. And what we were looking at, our super users were still very product focused. Again, we're looking at those break fix solutions and workarounds. So to put a program name to all of these dynamics, this is the Autodesk Expert Elite program. And it was established in 2012 and has grown to recognize over 460 plus individuals that have a deep passion for our products and volunteer their time willingly. What's important to note is that 60% of our Expert Elite members spend their time contributing to the forums with over 100K annual replies. But our super user program and the benefits and the offerings that we have, the contributions that we're looking at, haven't grown in the same way that our members have evolved since 2012. Our other 40% of members are making these outstanding contributions in modalities outside of the forums. And this is where we realize we have an opportunity for us to consider, how do we evolve with our members? How do we evolve where our advocates are going and recognize those contributions and end up having deeper engagements? So the Expert Elite program is growing alongside our user group program at Autodesk. So in the current state, we have a super user program and we have a user group program that we're looking at, our advocates. And we were lucky that we had customers already out there leading groups on their own, but we had never centralized a program at Autodesk to support those leaders. And so our user group leaders are not always those super users. It brings us that new set of influential community members and a new way to engage with them. So why a user group program? This aligns to our growth as a community to focus on engaging the community in addition to the metrics we have focused on helping. By meeting our user group leaders where they are, this meant they weren't only on our company-owned or Autodesk Forum platform. We started to expand outside of Autodesk-owned properties. And this is things such as meetup.com, social groups on LinkedIn and Facebook, Telegram, VK, WhatsApp for our international communities. And lastly, the user groups became a point of moving from product-focused discussions, but to what's happening in the industry. And what we saw is our customers and our community were going to user groups to have those types of conversations and to have that in a physical or a virtual space environment. So again, let's bring these dynamics into a real life name of what our program is, the Autodesk Group Network. So it's still fairly new. Like I said, we established this in 2019 to support our network of groups, growing to over 200 groups worldwide now. What I think is really unique from the start is that we supported both physical and online communities. And during COVID, we saw groups pivot quickly to still host meetings online. And now as we move forward and we're starting to see things safely reopening, hopefully, we are looking at now our communities to have hybrid meetups. And that's just gonna add another layer to the power of our user groups. What's important though, and the note I have here on the bottom, is that our user group program is currently separate from our super users. Though we do see an overlap of individuals, especially those that fall in that 40% bucket that I mentioned, that are engaging beyond the Autodesk forums. And this is why moving forward, it's important that we consider the relationship now between our advocate programs and that they don't sit in silos, because we want to make it the easiest and the best experience for our advocates, especially those that are contributing in multiple different avenues, and make it as clear as possible to them to what advocate program they belong and what they have available to them. So this brings us into our future state. We've built a really strong foundation, and we know we can continue to deepen our relationships with our user group leaders, super users, and other advocates. So where do we want to go? We want to meet the needs and motivations and behaviors of the advocates that we might be missing, especially those that are on social, blogs, LinkedIn Learning, to name a few. And why? We'll continue doing this on top of the well-established super user and user group programs for help and engage, but we're going to reimagine what those advocate programs look like and how that fits into the overall umbrella of community at Autodesk. And we'll focus on the help and engage parts of the community, but we want to strive to inspire the community and for the community to inspire us and bring that voice of the customer back to our company. And where will we monitor and track contributions? Well, the ambition is everywhere. We'll need the technology definitely to help measure the success and measure those contributions, but this is how we're looking at opening our mindset to meet customers where they are, in addition to those advocates participating on the forums, which are so incredibly valuable, but it moves us to be more inclusive and represent really the breadth of our advocates and not have any barriers to recognize. Lastly, we want to help our community move from those product and industry-focused conversations to practice, how to adopt solutions across disciplines rather than these point-based solutions, and really elevating the power of what's capable when you bring a community together. So this roadmap and what you see here was a really beneficial tool for us to understand where are we now, and where do we want to go as a community and as the future of advocate programs. So this could be a really useful exercise for you to take a look at your advocacy programs or community in general and apply this who, why, where, and what. But now where I'm ready to take us forward is how are we going to get there? How are we going to get to this future state? And excited to show some models and approaches to do so. So this quote here on the next slide is something from the Community Industry Glossary that really helped communicate my approach to building advocate programs. And I'll just read it out loud here for all of us. While advocates may have some overlap with community, those super users, they often participate in different types of activities and behaviors. And these different types of activities and behaviors is what's so crucial and so important for us to understand the differences and then approach them with programs tailored to their needs. So using customer research, using persona development, we'll be able to really spot those differences and begin to build those tailored programs that meet them where they are, meet their needs, meet their motivations, and hopefully inspire them to continue doing more. So what kind of program do we build? This, this can go in so many different ways. I'm sure there are so many different types of advocate programs that you've heard of, so many different types of tactics to build into advocate programs. And this trifecta visual here that you see helped us communicate the distinction of the type of advocacy program we would build. It is important to note that I did not come up with this framework. This is one that is sourced from our community team, but I think it's such a great way to communicate this to all of you today. So depending on where your organizational structure is and where your community sits, this can impact the type of advocate program you might build. So maybe, for instance, your team is sitting within the marketing department and is farther removed from learning and support. This will change what's that low-hanging fruit for you compared to Autodesk that's more on the community learning and support-driven side. You can look at the same approach as sales and for connecting advocate programs to sales. But for us, our team sits within the platform, and this means we're looking at doing incremental improvement in the upper left part with community learning and support. And if we were ever going to move to marketing and sales, we're going to need more investment and more partnership. And that's not something we're looking at least now in the short term. It'll be a long-term area. So to bring some of these corners of the triangle to real life, I wanted to show some examples. So on the marketing side, think about customer stories, advocacy marketing, on the sales, customer reference, e-store sales. For us in the Autodesk community, and some examples that bring to life where we're moving is community events, campaigns, blogs with our top advocates, or giving the advocates the means to do each of these on their own. And we know this is where we can make those incremental improvements, perhaps on their profile and the reputation online, whether that's on social or on their Autodesk. We can also engage in learning and thought leadership activities, perhaps hackathons led by the community or in partnership with our product teams. So those are the direction that we're leaning. But again, this might be different dependent on where you're at in your organization. And ultimately, it just helps us set goals and identify realistic expectations of what we can accomplish in the first year. So now that I've set the foundation, let's shift gears and move into the approach I took to designing meaningful advocate programs within our team. I hope that this approach will help you break down the steps in building meaningful advocate programs, or some good takeaways as you might be reimagining. So first, define your measures of success. What are your goals for the advocate program? And let this become a part of your North Star as you move into step 2 of benchmarking, research, and data compilation. Make sure you're doing this with your customers and other like companies in the industry, and I'll double click down into this. Third, understand who your advocates are and what motivates them. To successfully accomplish step 3, you definitely need to stay rooted in your benchmark, research, and data compilation. Don't be making any assumptions or hypotheses about what you think your advocates might be doing or what your customers might be doing, but make sure you're listening to the data and you have the data to validate each of those assumptions that you might be making. And lastly, step 4, successfully co-design meaningful programs. And yes, I said co-design here, and this is where the fun part really begins, so that you can include your top community members and advocates in the design process. And with that, that's really the 4 steps, and let's double click down into the first one. So our success measures, we looked at integrating new measures of success on top of what we were already doing, definitely doing a retrospection of what we've measured before and matching that to where we want to go. So we use an OKR model, if you're not familiar with the OKRs, objectives and key results, to cultivate an inspiring advocate program objective statement. So what you see on the left is our objective statement, and I'm not going to read it in detail, but it'll be there for you to read. But it's important to note that we're looking at accomplishing this at scale. And from there, looking at measures of success on the right, looking at active members and member engagement, the NPS and satisfaction, And that's an NPS with our programs, but then also an NPS with the company, with Autodesk as a whole. Because as you're looking at value impact, why are you doing these advocate programs? Ask yourself why. And it's to bring them most likely closer, and for us, bring them closer to Autodesk and bring them closer to their products. And so that will be a really great set of success measures. Third and fourth are program benefit realization and value of feedback. So program benefit realization is looking at all of the program benefits that we have, how many of our advocates are actually using them, and what's the value that it's bringing to them. And for value of feedback, this is looking at, our advocates, are close with a lot of different teams across Autodesk. They're not just engaging with us as a community. And for those teams that they're engaging with, what is the value that they're bringing to them? Such as a product team, they have a set of advocates that they're engaging with. How does the product team see value in that feedback? And overall, in a future state, we're looking at unified dashboards so our members can see their reach and influence too. And we start to have that transparency in data, and that it's not just something that we're capturing about them, but they can actually see the impact and the value that they're having. So moving into steps 2 and 3, benchmarking and data compilation, and helping that allow you to understand who your advocates are. So what I have here is the benchmarking that we conducted in 2019. And I'm not gonna dive into like every single aspect of this visual here, but I think the important things to show are what we were leading in and what we were lagging in. So we knew, and through the benchmarking, we found that we were leading in our super user program, but we were lagging in user groups and advocacy. And so and also as a validation point, that this is something we need to prioritize moving forward. Our other observations were that there was the need to, one, track activity and contribution across different channels, validating that we can go beyond the forums and we can look at these new areas to have a really holistic and well-rounded community. Second was the drivers for community are measuring adoption and customer engagement. And this is something that we keep in mind as we look at our success measures and the types of contributions that we need to start capturing. And third, Autodesk was and is a leader in localizing communities as we support 10 languages across every community program we launch. So again, this benchmarking validated our need to expand our advocate programs and gave us some direction on what were the important business requirements to factor in as we build. Next was the customer research process. And so we were really lucky that our community team has hosted multiple research studies in the last 2 years annually, whether that was at our customer conference or throughout the year. And we leveraged those when the target audience matched to include in our analysis. But we also conducted 2 new additional research methods in March and April of this year, which were one-on-one interviews and a survey. And in these interviews and these surveys, we were looking at capturing what you see in those 3 sticky notes there. These were our attributes. We're looking at understanding their influence, reach, and where they're contributing and why they're contributing, which goes into motivations and behaviors, tapping into that intrinsic desire that they have to be an advocate, to be contributing in these different ways. And then lastly, the attitudes and needs, their attitudes towards Autodesk, and what are also their pain points and challenges. I think it's so important to get really realistic about what they might be struggling with or what barriers they might have, whether that's using our solutions or trying to be the best advocate that they can be. So last, and this is where Mural definitely became our best friend. If you've never used Mural before, and this is a new term or new tool to you, it's really a virtual whiteboard. And I'll feel free to put these links in the chat for some of these resources. But Mural allowed us to take all of those data points that we had gathered from all these different modalities and put them as sticky notes on a big virtual whiteboard. And from there, we created an attribute matrix. So the attributes that we had around 8, we had those listed across the top. And along the left-hand side, we had each of the types of advocates that we had seen, whether that was a super user, a user group leader on social, a social advocate, a thought leader, and we started to plug those data points in. But from there, it's still hard to see any trends or to see commonalities between different types of advocates. So we use attribute spectrums to find those trends. So you pull down one of those attributes, and let's say it's motivations, and you have 2 ends of the spectrum for motivation, and you start putting in your advocates on that spectrum. And so you might see over the 8 of those spectrums that you have that John and Sally are next to each other a lot. And that must mean something about John and Sally, that they must have something in common. or you might see people on two opposite ends of the spectrum all the time. So that was just another way to analyze the data and get us to the final goal of having 5 to 8 advocate profile cards. So you could also refer to these as persona cards, but we like to say that these are our advocate profile cards that's rooted in the motivations and the behaviors of the different types of advocates that we have. And from there, that moves us into being able to build one-on-one tailored programs to each of those advocates. So this will move us into step 4, the final approach. And like I said, one of my favorite parts to successfully co-design your meaningful programs with your customers. And this is where you can't be afraid to include your customers into this process and gain candid feedback and brainstorm some incredible ideas. I think what's important here in step 4 is to make sure it's not just a validation, that you're not as a team designing these programs and then including your customer to say, hey, is this valid? Would this work for you? But get them in from the ground up running. And so our approach to be able to do that is to co-build with your advocates and using a customer council as a structure to do so. So to establish your customer council, to create the terms, and where we were aiming was to engage 10 to 15 council members and host active work sessions that listen to them. An NDA most likely is required because you're going to have confidential information, but this council will allow you to have these work sessions and to understand how to build the best programs that you can build. And so we applied the design thinking methods to, one, validate the advocate profiles, gain alignment, say, yes, these resonate. And for us, it was incredible to see our council say, hey, I found me, or I'm in between this one and this one. And the fact that they could see themselves represented in these profile cards meant, hey, we did it right. This is definitely the direction to go. And then it moved us into the next 2 points of co-designing program benefits and shaping the criteria to join. So we used a creative matrix brainstorm and visualize the vote to help us brainstorm the relevant program benefits. Creative matrix, I can put a link in the chat, but is a structured way to have a brainstorm where we had our advocate profiles up top, and we had different categories like events, program benefits, recognition, opportunities for them to brainstorm in per advocate type. And then visualizing the vote to prioritize those benefits. And then we'll be moving into shaping criteria to join per each advocate program we'll be building. And then lastly, we're going to consider the journey of an advocate. This is the relationship between your advocate programs, not so they're just siloed programs, how we had previously, but maybe an advocate can move from one to another, or, how do we, again, create the most optimal experience so that those advocates that are participating in multiple spaces can do so seamlessly and can engage with our Autodesk community programs in the most easy and valuable way. So with that, I know that was a lot of framework and approaches, and I'm going to turn it back over to our MC to help with questions, but I will open it there for any questions that you might have, and I would love to stay connected even after this to help answer anything.
Hello. Information in a short space of time, and you did it so perfectly. I can't believe this is the first time that you're doing this. I'm sure everyone would agree in the chat. It was flawless. So well done. We do have some questions. So I know I'm conscious of time, so I want to get through them. There's been a question that's actually very popular from Brett. He says, what are some best practices you recommend for keeping these advocates engaged and helping each other outside of sending them swag?
Great question. And there's so many different ways to do that outside of swag. What I found, especially maybe if you're at the foundation of building, is thinking about what structure or what environment, what places can you create for your advocates to connect to one another. So a really great example of that is we worked again on a joint project to bring to life is our community dojo. This is a site for knowledge, resources, and best practices to building user groups. But we involved a lot of disconnected advocates that might not have known each other before. And through that, you started to see them engaging outside of those meetings that we were having to build a really tangible element to participate in each other's user groups or to start saying hi to each other on the forums. And as you can think about trying to build spaces for them to connect together in meaningful ways around topics that resonate with them, you'll start to see that trickling effect and that networking happen afterwards.
Great, some great ideas there. All right, we have time for another question. So Mimi says, what tools do you use to empower your community, brackets advocates, to run their programs?
Really great question. I'll use the user group program, the group network, as an example. So we have a set of tools that are looking at like meetup.com. We cover their subscription. And when we moved to a virtual environment, we also looked at reimbursing for virtual meeting technology so that they could then transfer to hosting these virtual events without the 40-minute time block of Zoom, things of that nature. We also provide, again, the community dojo that I mentioned. This is knowledge source on like really any type that you can think about of leading a successful user group. And those, again, were just like resources ready for them to use. Another one was working with our brand team to think about brand guidelines. How can you brand your user group? What product icons can you use? What logos do you have for yourself? What are presentation and meetup templates that you can use? So anything that was ready to go to be downloaded and then given for them to use outside of just swag.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to do one more question. Ruth says,
Awesome.
Since your customers are in so many different platforms, as you mentioned, how often are you interacting with them there?
Yeah, really great question. So we on our team have a set of international community managers as well as industry community managers. So I think in total, that's around, 12 to 13, we're growing. And so we look at trying to have, especially in our international communities, just to say hello, especially when they first join. And it's not looking at a day-to-day engagement, but again, it's just bringing a face and bringing a human element into their platform so that if they do need something, hey, they know Autodesk is there, they know we're watching, and they know that we're participating. When big events are happening, I think it's really great to just be in attendance, to be a fly on a wall. And again, it's just putting a human element behind community and showing that there are real people behind the big Autodesk A in community.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. All right, we are out of time. I know there's more questions, so feel free to get in contact with Rachel either here on the Bevy platform, or I'm sure, Rachel, you're on social media, right?
Yes, I am on social media. LinkedIn is the best spot, so feel free to follow me on LinkedIn, and look forward to connecting with all of you and hope to see you at more of these sessions.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Please give her a virtual round of applause in the chat.